in addition to the patient data, we could also collect environmental, location, or contextual data. And this could lead to newer and more frequent insights, such as correlation between activity and health changes or impact of surroundings. So with broader availability of real world data, we could see a paradigm shift on how we conduct research, design clinical studies, collect data, or even provide care.
Welcome to the Life Sciences Leadership Podcast, where we delve deep into the life sciences industry and uncover effective strategies, innovations, and future trends. Your host, Axtria's Jasmeet and Sunil, engages highly acclaimed leaders in discussions focused on directing commercial success in the life sciences industry. Whether you're transforming your commercial success strategy or just craving dynamic discussion, this is the show for you.
Hello everyone, I'm your host Jasmeet and Sunil, and welcome to the Life Sciences Leadership Podcast brought to you by Axtria. Our goal with this show is to bring to you effective strategies, innovations, and most importantly, people who are driving improved business and patient outcomes within the life sciences industry. Our guest today is Sunil Agarwal. Sunil leads the clinical excellence practice at Axtria. He is the force behind Axtria's data-driven and patient-centric solutions in the clinical business. The scope and scale of clinical domain within our industry is vast, which means this role comes with a lot of responsibility and requires a tremendous amount of experience and knowledge. Sunil is a champion in both. He leads digital transformation and improvement programs for top pharma companies, including implementation of next-gen clinical platforms, patient analytics solutions, and automated regulatory submissions. As a thought leader, Sunil shares his expertise at several international life sciences forums on emerging topics such as mobile health, clinical data sciences, and AI/ML. Sunil holds a master's and a bachelor's degree in computer science from University of Dortmund and a management certificate from Boston University. Sunil, thank you so much for joining us today and welcome to the show.
Thank you, Jasmeet, for having me here.
Sunil, let's start with the fundamentals. Today we are discussing real-world data in clinical trials. So I want to understand why it matters at this point in time. Can you please provide some background on challenges with randomized controlled trials and why we need to leverage real-world data?
Sure. Thank you again, Jasmeet, for having me here. So we all know that even though randomized controlled trials, or as we call them RCTs, have long been the gold standard for assessing efficacy and safety, they come with their own set of challenges. For example, to enroll patients in a trial, we draft a protocol in traditional fashion, which would include certain eligibility criteria for patient enrollment. So in one way, we choose our patients based on inclusion-exclusion criteria. So that means the representation of the patient population may not guarantee the real-world clinical situation of the patients. So they represent a very selective proportion from the real-world patient pool. So now let's see what value we get if we leverage real-world data, or RWD, in clinical trials. Using some easily accessible real-world data sources, for example, EHR or electronic health records, or claims data, or patient registries, we can get actual insights of the demographics, medical history, or ongoing treatment, adverse events, efficacy information, and lab results across hundreds of patients, and that too for much longer duration, spanning for even decades. Right? So you can imagine how much value these diverse sets of data points can bring to us if we use these appropriately in our clinical trials.
Sunil, thanks for explaining why real-world data is beneficial. But let's dig a little bit deeper, because I believe audience will find it valuable if you can expand on what further value realization you see when you bring real-world data to clinical trials.
Sure. So let me just take a step back. So RWD is playing an important role in the overall evolution of clinical data sciences.
Right.
So RWD data could come from EHR, as I mentioned earlier, or claims databases, patient registries, wearables, mobile health apps. In addition to the patient data, we could also collect environmental, location, or contextual data. And this could lead to newer and more frequent insights, such as correlation between activity and health changes or impact of surroundings. So with broader availability of real world data, we could see a paradigm shift on how we conduct research, design clinical studies, collect data, or even provide care.
That makes a lot of sense, Sunil. It is clear to me that real world data presents a great opportunity as you talked about that paradigm shift, and especially as it relates to clinical trials. To make it more real for our audience, can you talk about some use cases of real world data?
Sure, absolutely, Jasmeet. There could be several use cases, right from a study plan to study closeout. Let me just call out a few. Number one, protocol design. So, for example, leveraging RWD for more realistic inclusion-exclusion criteria, which is not too stringent, or for feasibility assessment, endpoint selection, or even for sample size estimation during the study design phase. Number two, master protocols, real world data, and that's also an emerging theme. So real world data sources such as electronic health records and claims databases, they can aid in identifying suitable participants for various arms of a master protocol or master protocol studies, making patient recruitment more targeted and efficient. Number three, site and patient identification. Real world data can help us to identify sites with a sufficient pool of patients based on demographics, disease prevalence, or diversity considerations, etc. Right? So this will not only reduce site identification and onboarding time, but will also help to accelerate patient recruitment and meet diversity goals. Number four, synthetic control arm. Again, big emerging theme when it comes to real world data. For example, real world data replacing control arm in RCTs, or real world data driven simulation to publish evidence early on while trial is ongoing. Regulatory agencies worldwide, be it FDA, PMDA, or EMA, etc., they're encouraging, in fact, incorporation of evidence beyond that from RCTs, as we have seen in some recent approvals from authorities, such as FDA approval of Ibrance in men with breast cancer, or for such other products such as tuberculosis treatment or neuroendocrine tumors. In all these, the substantial evidence standard was met using results from external data. And lastly, number five, pragmatic trials. So which is again another good use case of RWD. Pragmatic trials are large, simple trials designed to include a diverse patient group, all participating within their own settings, like be at home, in their primary doctor's office, etc.
Sunil, those are some great use cases that not only describe the importance of real world data, but also show how this data is driving innovation. Now, all of this is great, but I really want to understand if life sciences organizations are set up to fully leverage the potential extended by real world data. My first guess is that there are quite a few challenges that pharma companies face in using real world data. So I want to know if you agree that there are challenges, and if you do, can you shed some light on the challenges faced by your customers?
Absolutely. In fact, that's a great question, Jasmeet. So we understand that RWD could bring in many positives, as described in the previous use cases in clinical trials. However, is this going to be as easy as it sounds? Of course not. So let's touch upon briefly what challenges we will face in using real-world data sources in clinical trials. Number one, ensuring data is fit for purpose. So this is the first question we must ask ourselves, is whether the RWD source capture information that we need. Real-world data must be acceptable in terms of quality, completeness, and relevance. Number two, processing large and potentially messy data. Real world data is usually messy. Unlike EDC, they usually don't have detailed quality checks at the point of data entry.
Right.
So we will have to analyze the data quality carefully, handle those missing or incomplete data, or check for data accuracy and errors before we select it for clinical trial use. Trust me on this, it is a very time and labor intensive task.
Right.
Number three, I would say, Jasmeet, data privacy and security. So the real world data source may not have stringent data privacy and security related protections. So we must address protecting patient confidentiality and anonymize this data before we use it in clinical trials. And lastly, number four, patient consent, ethics, and regulatory compliance. Stating the obvious, but very important point is in obtaining informed consent from patients and ensuring regulatory compliance in real world data use. Policies must be in place on what data are to be shared. For example, only consented data are to be sent, as real world data sources may capture some additional data. So we also need to ensure compliance with regulatory standards such as GXP, GDPR, and HIPAA.
Thanks for explaining the challenges, Sunil. And I like the fact that they're coming from a practitioner who's helping companies overcome these challenges. So that's great. Now, in your last point, you talked about regulatory compliance as one of the challenges. And as we all know, this is a critical area for our industry, and it always requires special attention. Could you expand on the regulatory considerations for using real-world data in clinical trials?
Absolutely, Jasmeet. So let me state that regulatory agencies worldwide are very supportive in adopting and embracing overall digital transformation. And in context of real-world data, I just want to highlight key regulatory considerations for using real-world data in clinical trials. For example, number one, data quality and data integrity. So as I mentioned before, real-world data could be messy, right? So ensure data is complete. Implement missing data imputation procedure to maintain data integrity before using in clinical trials, or implementing strict data quality checks. For example, real-world data may have lots of missing information, so consider defining sophisticated data imputation strategies on them to maintain the data integrity. Number two, data source validation. Deploying appropriate validation methods to address data quality standards and variability issues across real-world data sources, be it EHRs, variables, claims data, registries, etc. Number three, I would say, is around data standardization and validation. So disease coding or data formats may differ per real-world data source. So we must consider adopting medical coding standards and consider harmonizing and standardizing data across sources. For example, we could think about leveraging FHIR and the CDISC industry standards for standardization and transformation. Number four, is around data privacy and data security. Compliance with data protection regulations like GDPR and HIPAA is crucial to maintain data integrity and protect patient confidentiality as per regional or even country-specific guidelines. So all of these 4 points which I talked about, all these pointers kind of could form a basic framework in validating real-world data sources for regulatory compliance.
Right. Sunil, as you were describing the regulatory consideration for using real-world data, I can sense the depth of knowledge you have in this space, which is amazing because your customers get the real value from this knowledge. Talking about customers, in my last question, I would like to talk about some of the work you are doing for them. Can you tell our audience the innovations and unique approaches you're bringing to your customers?
Sure, Jasmeet, absolutely. I would like to highlight a couple of unique approaches we are bringing to our customers as they embrace real-world data in clinical trials. So case study one is about using simulation technique on real-world data. So objective of this study was to generate real-world evidence from claims and EHR data on the impact of early intensification to clinical guideline recommended combination treatment with LLT on major cardiovascular events. So in this case, we use Monte Carlo patient level simulation model to incorporate uncertainty in variables affecting the patient journey. We simulated various different treatment scenarios representing different combinations of treatments, duration, and model horizons. And we also applied treatment effects from RCTs or randomized controlled trials to real-world clinical practice setting. And the benefits of this program are included, but not limited to, number one, the clinical benefit of immediate intensification to guideline recommended treatment strategies over versus delaying the intensification. Number two was the identification of target subpopulations who could benefit most. And lastly, in generating evidence to support patient-physician decision-making. So that's one case study. I'll cover one more case study. The second case study is about clinical trial site selection using real-world data and advanced analytics for an oncology study. Site selection for oncology trials is typically based on internal knowledge of investigators and site expertise and trial track record. So the objective of this project was to support decision-making by leveraging real-world medical claims data and clinical trials registry data for richer insights into current and potential sites expertise for various tumor types. So in this project, we applied AI/ML driven analytics for recommended list of sites that meet the constraints of the study, provided ability for users to create multiple scenarios optimized across KPIs, including site feasibility inputs and local validation. We made available optimal scenarios predicting recruitment speed and cost based on recommended site list. And lastly, we built AI/ML solution with machine learning capabilities and continuous predictive modeling through a feedback loop. So the benefits of this project included and are not limited to number one, site valuation in terms of trial patient potential, site profiling for expertise and trial experience, identification of new but high potential sites, and lastly, actionable site and HCB profiling. So there are many more, Jasmeet, I could go on, but overall, we as a data science company are committed to supporting our customers with innovative approaches and services in making clinical trials accessible, faster, and efficient.
That's great, Sunil. Thanks for providing those examples of work you're doing for your customers. It is great to see the innovations Axtria is bringing to the market. As I said before, that was my last question. But before we wrap up, I would like to summarize our discussion for the audience. So what I understand is, one, there is a lot of potential to effectively use all types of real-world data for clinical trials, even though it has its own set of challenges that you talked about, such as data quality, privacy, and bias. And there is an emerging need for data-driven and digital solutions to utilize real-world data and minimize its limitations. Second, there is a wider availability and increasing acceptability among global regulatory bodies for real-world data when companies follow key regulatory considerations. And three, to ensure successful and cost-effective use of real-world data for clinical trials, companies need a set of capabilities and some enablers, which include data science and engineering, domain expertise, ethical considerations, and support from regulatory agencies. Is there anything else you would like to add to this summary?
No, Jasmeet, I think you summed it very well. So I would just like to add that to measure the success of a therapy, you need results. So you need to know what worked and what did not. In the past, that came from traditional trials or what we call randomized controlled trials. Now we can finally have a clearer picture by including real-world data. Real-world data is not a replacement for RCT. Instead, they are another tool in our arsenal. They supplement, fill data gaps, and expand our efforts in hard-to-research diseases. They have the potential to be life-saving, and that is our industry's ultimate goal, better patient outcomes.
Very well said, Sunil. The industry's goal is better patient outcomes, and we are all working towards that. Thank you so much for such an insightful episode, and this is a very important one. I'm sure our audience will be able to apply some of the insights and learnings you shared to their business and get ahead of the competition. Thank you so much for coming to the show and sharing your knowledge and deep experience in this space.
Thank you, Jasmeet.
To the audience, thank you so much for joining us today and making this show such a big success. Please feel free to share any feedback, and I look forward to meeting you in the next episode.
Thanks for joining us on the Life Sciences Leadership Podcast. If you loved this episode, please share with friends and subscribe on your favorite streaming platform. For more information, visit lifesciencespodcast.com. Until next time.